we're going to actually have a live satellite feed from Commerce Secretary Pritzker coming in at the end of this panel. So our timing is going to be set a little bit around her feed in, and the importance of that and the relevance of her linking into this discussion is that today she's announcing the next phase of the National Export Initiative. So you'll have an opportunity to hear from her about what the federal approach is going forward and how it relates specifically to what you're trying to accomplish here in Greater Phoenix and in some of the other communities that have joined us. We're joined specifically because we're going to hold a working session with the other regions around the country right after this meeting is over and have a dialogue, including San Diego and Portland, who are joining us in this panel to talk about the specifics of how to act, as Ambassador Hills mentioned, how to act on this and not just sit and talk about it. So I'm joined today, starting on the left, with David Graham from the City of San Diego. David is newly appointed to Mayor Faulkner's leadership team and is responsible for all the departments' activities related to departments whose activities are related to economic development, land use planning efforts, neighborhood services. David previously worked for Mayor Jerry Sanders, who was the lead in initiating, catalyzing efforts for San Diego to engage more around export and trade efforts and try to be part of the Global Cities Initiative. And David was central to bringing together the regional stakeholders to pursue that effort and has been central to carrying through on the export and trade planning strategies and now in implementation. David's also getting married in September, and if you're interested in seeing his wedding proposal in San Diego, NBC's affiliate covered that. So you can look at it, and it involves an ice skating rink, which is special when you're in San Diego. Next to David is Derek Olsen. Derek is the Vice President for Regional Strategy and Coordination with Greater Portland, Inc. And Greater Portland, Inc. is similar to GPEC in that it's a public-private partnership group, and they are promoting lots of different kinds of business activities in Greater Portland. Derek is responsible for now executing on Greater Portland's export strategy and leading in the foreign direct investment component that's come after that. Derek has a lot of experience not just locally but also at the state level, where he worked for Oregon's Business Development Department in dealing with international trade issues, and federally, where he was a Foreign Service officer for many years, posted in Asia and Latin America, and also to posting in Washington, D.C., which I know you all might consider to be foreign location as well. Derek, we were talking a little bit this morning. Derek's been married for 23 years, and his advice to David was his wedding recessional. Derek's was the theme to Star Wars. So Lee Benson. Lee is emblematic of the kind of business leader and representing the kinds of firms that Amy and Barry were just talking about in terms of growing more deliberately in this region and around the country, to where economic growth and sustainable job creation is going to occur. Lee is the CEO, and many of you probably know him, but he's the CEO of 3 companies, Able Engineering, Able Aerospace, and Execute to Win in the aerospace industry cluster, so prevalent here in Greater Phoenix, and also in services. And Lee has grown these companies from small to higher end of mid-sized over the past several years with a very specific focus on how exports fit into the business agenda. And so he has a perspective of somebody who has not been benefiting from this strategic emphasis on how to export more in the small, medium-sized enterprises. And I'm not sure about his wedding status. You can ask him that afterward. And then obviously you all know Barry. So I actually wanted to just start with Lee, because you are the focal point. You represent the focal point for all of these efforts around exports and as I said, the size and type of firms that will be benefiting from a greater strategic focus on them. Could you talk a little bit about what your firms do, and then what your experience has been, and why exports was a centerpiece of your strategy before the National Export Initiative or localities were really emphasizing that?
Sure. I founded Able Engineering in '95, and we've grown that to dealing with about 1,000 customers, mostly aircraft operators and maintenance facilities in around 60 countries. And from the beginning, the first year with about $300,000 in sales and wondering if we're going to make it to where it is today, the biggest part of the market out there is actually the international market. The U.S. market for what we do on the fixed wing and rotor wing side is huge, but again, much bigger internationally. And the first few years, I would spend upwards of 4 to 6 months traveling the world, different regions, learning all this stuff the hard way. And it would have been really nice out of the gate to have a 12-step program to exporting that we had access to, something along those lines. So that's what I like about what we're doing here today, is developing programs like that.
And so what proportion of your business now is in exporting, and how did that develop over time?
Sure, about 36% of what we do is exporting, and less than 1 or 2% of what we do comes from the state of Arizona. So we're bringing all these resources into the state. So in both ways, I think it's really good. And I love the idea of telling all of our employees on a regular basis, which we do anyway, but put it in their paycheck, 36% of what we do comes from exports. Support that in any way you can.
Awesome.
Barry, when you were going through your very brief presentation, it's actually reflective of a pretty comprehensive market assessment process that I think 150 firms have been touched in this region to assess. Could you describe how you've connected with firms like Lee's and what you've seen in more detail than what you were able to present?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important that we have to do in this market is to kind of align and integrate the work. So we've been doing a lot of retention and expansion work with our communities on the aerospace defense sector because of the threats on sequestration. So, in the context of that, we've been analyzing the capabilities of the aerospace defense sector. So we put about 20 to 40 hours of work per profile of 114 aerospace defense companies in this region that made up about 36,000 jobs to not only gather this data, but to assess the threat of sequestration going forward. And one of the things we found in this aerospace defense network is how deep and rich they are in research engineering capabilities, which also was reflected in that design outcome. So on one hand, we were evaluating that sector for, where's the contraction on transportation goods and products, and how is that possibly being negatively impacted, in things like, computer development. And on the other side, these firms are extraordinarily robust on the design side, which in our market has a 31% increase. So, it's kind of a very sophisticated analysis across the board that's beyond, just kind of products, but also services and capabilities. We interviewed 60 information communication technology firms. We met with every major small and medium enterprise in the healthcare sector as well. So it was almost a year's worth of work to physically get the details. And that's part of our challenge going forward. How do you maintain relevant data in the community when the federal data is kind of difficult and lags? Brookings found some really good software models, I think, to help us rationalize federal data for the local level. But it is really a hand-to-hand combat kind of exercise to do this right, including the services that are going to have to be provided to small and medium enterprise companies that might have 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 employees and help them, grow that into a global footprint. They're going to need physical support services, from the local business and economic development community.
So Lee, building on that, you started this much earlier. What were your challenges, and how do you see this process going forward? What are some of the key things that a company like yours, an entrepreneur like yourself, we're facing that need to be accommodated or addressed going forward?
Sure. One thing I would say is that if we had help early on, I fully believe that today the export business that we are doing would be 3 to 4 times what it is. So I really wish we had that. And some of the bigger obstacles, we've talked about it today, but really effective regulatory and trade bilateral agreements. For example, we're an FAA repair station. Everything we do actually gets approved by the FAA, and then we have to go over and we want to do work in China. We'll spend tens of thousands of dollars flying their entourage to our facility to jump through at most 70 to 80% of the exact same hoops, and they take way longer to approve what we do. So we need help there. Or doing business in Brazil. Now there's a 40% import duty for what we have. Yeah, we've figured out how to be competitive, but it's really, really tough. And we just need a lot more effective agreements that way.
So you described sort of federal macro framework setting issues. Are there other things that relate down at the state or to the regional level where GPEC and chambers of commerce or universities are interacting with businesses that you would have found helpful in your efforts?
Yeah, and I'm fairly new at looking at this whole process and what we're doing, and I'm really interested in whatever we do, it actually has to work. And we've taken advantage, for example, of a service called GoldKey Service about 5 or 6 times now. And it's only a few $100s to set appointments in any region of the world where we have a U.S. embassy. And I could point to one example in Colombia where for maybe a $20,000 total investment to travel there, we can point to millions of dollars in additional business coming into our facility in roughly the 50% gross profit range. So this has been absolutely fantastic. And rather than having a bunch of small pieces, for example, here's an attorney that can help you out in this particular region, here's another product over here, we can connect you to something along these lines. You know, the small and medium-sized business community here in Arizona, these are hardworking, very smart men and women running great businesses, wonderful instincts about what they do, but I wouldn't for a second overestimate their ability to connect the dots around exporting. So if we had some sort of a portal where we could go, and I would have loved to have had this in the beginning, and it basically said, here's what the market looks like worldwide in all the different regions for your products and services. Here are the fully vetted agents that could help distribute, sell your products in different parts of the world. Here's what the strongest competitors are doing over there. Here are the downloadable agreements to interact with these organizations and these rep companies to sell your products out there. You know, building some sort of a portal like that would have been fantastic. As I said, I think we'd be 3 to 4 times the total dollars in exports that we're doing today.
So David, San Diego sits on an international border, looks toward Asia because you're on the Pacific coast, and the economy is relatively strong there. It's also an innovation because what Barry was describing, Phoenix is moving toward or needs to move toward more of. It's innovation-based. You have world-class research universities that are spinning off lots of commercial applications in telecommunications, in genomics, and all these advanced industries that Amy mentioned is driving the next economy. So with all that, why did San Diego decide to pursue an export or a global trade and investment strategy?
So the San Diego story really is one of self-reliance and one of innovation. And what we began to recognize several years ago was that although we had good trade organizations, although we had companies that were doing innovative things, there wasn't the work across all of the silos around some sort of central idea or theme. So we started doing work with a collection of 26 business, academic, and civic leaders around the Chairman's Competitiveness Council, focused on one thing: what are San Diego's traded economies? And we found that our traded economies are the military, tourism, and innovation/advanced industries. That represents about 45% of the San Diego economy. And so with the work that had been done there, when the opportunity came to partner with Brookings and on the global cities and thank you to our friends from JPMorgan Chase, it was the perfect time for us to step into evaluating our global identity, but I don't know that we were exactly prepared for the results of what that would be. In looking at the data, very similar to here in Phoenix, whereas we're at 16th, I believe, in exports, we're at 55th in export intensity. And we're not used to being 55th at anything. So we recognize that although we had a position on the border, and although we were on the Pacific Rim, being on the border does not make you a global city. And that's what we've been doing with this effort to become intentional about our global orientation, about exports, and about a global engagement strategy. Because exports, FDI, and global engagement, it's not an option anymore, it's an imperative. And that's kind of the basis for why we're doing the work that we are.
So you did your market assessment that Barry just described. Phoenix is almost complete through in terms of analyzing, talking to businesses. Can you describe a little bit about that and what you all found that was surprising or you're open to to things you didn't expect?
Sure. The first thing was to make it as objective as possible. So we partnered with the International Relations and Pacific Studies at UCSD because we wanted something that could blow up any preconceived notions that we may have had. So we interviewed 300 businesses, then we did local intelligence interviews to have both a qualitative and quantitative assessment. And what we found was that specifically around this idea of global fluency, that our local leaders were not leading when it came to talking about either exports or FDI or trade. It was not a part of our local vocabulary, and a lot of our companies recognized that. We also found that although we had different sectors that were doing great in their particular industries, so Biocom doing amazing things in the life sciences industry, Connect doing amazing things in technology, there was no coordinated effort to develop what San Diego's brand was, nor a strategy around what we are. And that's led us to kind of begin circulating around this idea of San Diego Innovates. That's really our brand, and how are we aligning our strategies across our trade organizations, across the city, across the county, and our EDC and chamber, so that we're all speaking with that same sort of language. Because what we're recognizing, I think what the Chairman's Council recognized and what we're recognizing through this Global Cities work is global fluency has to become our mother tongue, and it's not. And once we begin to sort of have that self-awareness, we can change the conversation and change the focus of a lot of our economic development activities.
So Derek, Portland was in the original 4 pilot areas, so you've had the longest period of time involved in creating and then now executing specific efforts and hopefully getting some results. Amy mentioned industry cluster focus and a couple of the particular elements that came out of that. Could you talk about just the approach that Portland took, how it related to your prior economic development strategy around industry clusters?
Sure. So Portland and the Portland region, we've had for a time known that we have 4 main clusters that we address: advanced manufacturing, which is pretty broadly defined; athletic and outdoor, I think Nike; high tech, Intel, and we share, of course, a lot of these areas with the Phoenix area; and then clean tech. And so parts of our strategy are cross-cutting across all those industries, but then we dove in on 2 specific industry clusters where we thought we could really make some change. One was on the high-tech software area, where we have specific strategic actions built around helping that, which is an overwhelming share of our exports, the semiconductor, computer and electronics industry. And so, as you saw in Amy's presentation and some of the others, we have specific strategic actions built around that. But then we also, in the clean tech, we devised this We Build Green Cities strategy that Amy talked about, which is taking our strengths in a certain area and turning it around to be an export marketing tool, and really having it be an umbrella where the public and private sector to come together to say, not only is this a nice place to visit and live, but we can help these companies have export sales in goods and especially in services to cities overseas that need that expertise.
So how did you come through that process of focusing on the sustainability sector? I mean, what was it that you identified from your interaction with the rest of the world, or how the world viewed you?
Right. Well, I think we're fortunate in that if like many cities in the U.S., we're still growing our reputation and our connections overseas, and so. But we found that where people do know us, it is often in the clean, livable sustainability areas. And I guess really the switch and the ability to sit down and dive into this process through the Global Cities Initiative was to say, okay, how can we build off these strengths and see something that is most uniquely Portland's strengths that can really help us overseas. In some of our other clusters, we have a lot of strength, but they tend to be, you go to a specific firm for one item or another, whereas in the clean tech, we were finding a lot of cross-cutting where you'd have like a green building design who would pull in someone who does a living roof, and somebody else who maybe is a lead designer, and then or maybe has certified building materials that go into it. And so a lot of times you have that cross-cutting approach that was very intriguing for some of the cities, not just in developing countries like you might think, but also in Japan and other advanced economies that wanted to take a fresh look at how they handled the built environment. And so we've seen that our nascent reputation in this area has clicked with our strengths in firms, and it has been a winning combination early on.
So let's talk about how you operationalize. So
Sure.
You identified the strategy, how you fit into global brand and where your industry strengths were. Then what did you do to actually get more businesses exporting and more business for those businesses?
So for We Build Green Cities, we had one of our key partners, the Portland Development Commission, went to some of our private sector leaders in the area, and we got both in-kind and then financial assistance to fund this effort, where if you go to, for instance, We Build Green Cities, if you Google that, there is a nice video done by some of the same folks that do a lot of the advertising for Nike and others that talks about our heritage, why it's a strength. We were able to pull in companies, some large ones like ZGF Architects, who has done some international work, as well as smaller ones who were sort of on the cusp of doing that. Specifically, to put this in operation, the Portland Development Commission and other partners in the region worked with these companies in Japan, building off our strong relationships there. And I think this is where you see some of the ties between the exports and foreign direct investment, because we've had significant Japanese foreign direct investment in our region for quite a while. So we can build off those ties, the good reputation that Portland area and Oregon in general has in Japan, to bring over delegations with specific Japanese-speaking economic development experts from the Portland area who are able to help make those connections. And through that, they signed what's called a Smart Cities Partnership MOU, which is essentially leading to real development opportunities in Japan, and then delegations that will come back over and build upon that. And so we've had a series now of visits to Japan, and it's really been a strong point. And we hope to build from that off into some of the other markets, which may be a little more challenging, as you're referring to, like Brazil and some of the others, where there's a lot of opportunity, but maybe it's a newer market for us.
What size and what kinds of companies are part of that Japanese effort?
Sure.
And have you actually gotten any contracts done?
Yeah, they've signed a deal based on, so the MOU is not just one of these delegation MOUs that down the road might mean something. This is an actual deal between private companies and a Japanese developer. So it's a consortium of folks, which ZGF Architects is probably the largest. They've done a lot of buildings throughout the U.S. and overseas. But then there's a host of smaller firms, about I think it's 4 or 5, that are part of that group. And then for instance, when that happened, and we were able to publicize it and say, look, we've been able to actually land a deal. Our partners have been able to land a deal for Portland companies in Japan. Next day I saw one of my friends who works for another firm. It's a Korean-owned design firm in the Portland area, and they said, we want to get involved in this. We have international ties, and we've been doing some work in some markets, but we want to be part of this story. We see ourselves in this. We want to be doing this overseas. And so we've seen it build upon each other, and the real success long-term is going to be that private-public partnership. I mean, it can't just be the public sector emphasizing this as it should, but the private sector saying this is an achievable goal that we see as valuable for our business interests. And so far, that is working.
One more question for the two of you, then I'll bring it back to Phoenix. Off that point about the private sector leadership. So you have lots of different stakeholders. Greater Portland Inc. is relatively new in terms as an organization. There's a long history, multiple, as you mentioned, business associations and lots of fragmentation among local political jurisdictions in your regions. How did you address that? I mean, everybody's going to be dealing with that in Phoenix. How did you address that? How did you organize yourselves and then and move from this market assessment phase into a strategy that ultimately somebody is acting on? Actually, multiple actors will have to implement in your regions.
So for us, having had 7 mayors in 10 years and 4 in the last 16 months, there wasn't a whole lot of political leadership to rely on. And here I think you're very fortunate in listening to Mayor Stanton and to others that there is that vision there. But it really required each of our trade organizations, which are quite well established, have good leadership, to recognize that it's about cooperation, not competition. So you may be a member of Connect and the regional EDC and the chamber because each have their sort of running lane that they're supposed to be working on. There's not this jealousy of memberships amongst the various organizations, so that when we got to this question of exports and globalization and how we were going to engage on a larger scale, we were able to pool the resources of each of the right people in these organizations around this common vision that we're still creating, without it being some new organization in our particular case, without it being another membership organization that was going to compete, because we were able to lay out the value proposition for each of the leaders of those organizations, and their membership really had bought into the idea that we had to do this, because essentially in San Diego, over the last decade at least, the traditional economic development proposition of site selection and incentives has been withering. We have to do something different, and because of those needs, I think our business leaders, now our new elected mayor who gets this stuff, all are willing to kind of move in the same and proper direction without this sort of membership-based organization fighting between each other.
Derek, and then maybe get some feedback from Barry and Lee about their perspectives locally.
Sure. Well, the mayor of Portland and the city of Portland were instrumental in starting this partnership with Brookings and JPMorgan Chase. But because the region had, I think, the foresight to see that this needed to be a regional play and it needed to be in an organization that was nonpartisan and didn't do advocacy work, they chose Greater Portland Inc., which at the time was quite a new organization. We're now about to celebrate our 3rd year anniversary. I mean, we're still pretty young. It has allowed us to really transition with no blip when they had a change in mayor in the major city of Portland. And so both have been supportive of the effort, but because we were in this regional effort, and I think because you've chosen to use Greater Phoenix, I think that's a wise choice, because it allows you to be more of a positive, focused, something that to get to some of the things that the previous panel was talking about, you can lay aside some of the controversy and focus on the job growth through exports, as opposed to some of the battles that can be taking place, because it becomes then a fundamental aspect of business retention and expansion. And so we were able to get Intel to co-chair our steering committee along with the president of Metro, which is a tri-county elected body. And we have a mixture of sort of folks that are small, medium-sized, as well as large businesses and elected officials on our steering committee to give us that oversight. And I think that as our organization grows, that will continue to help give us strength to implement this.
Barry, how does that relate to what you're trying to do going forward here in Phoenix?
Yeah, I think it's important. This is a business modeling exercise. It isn't about the Greater Phoenix Economic Council being in 100 different business platforms. But what gets things done is execution. And, our organization is positioned to execute because the leader's already there. The second piece from all this conversation is you can't execute at all in Washington, D.C. So historically, Washington, D.C. was a place where we executed. Now, San Diego's talking about innovation. Where did they get their innovation? They got their innovation from the federal government. Okay, the Navy Yard, the Navy Center, the cybersecurity work. Now they're commercializing their private behaviors off of the role of the federal government. Well, this is Arizona. Okay, we barely even know the federal government. Okay, we don't have an innovation base from the federal government. We're going to have to build our own innovation base. So the beauty of the whole Brookings initiative is each one of these metropolitan plans are tailored for the market. I think Denver has 21 or 23 federal labs. We do not have one. So when you're in Denver, the first question is, how do you commercialize the federal lab? Well, what's your metropolitan export plan when you don't have one? And so the federal government's not going to recover its financial prowess between the tightening on Medicare, Medicaid, and defense to suddenly go back to the New Deal and build out federal labs. We're going to have to do that ourselves. We're going to have to build our own sources of income and our own ingenuity around our own kind of innovation. And by the way, that's an advantage, because I'd hate to think that my innovation was in the hands of the federal government, because they can't seem to do too many things very effectively right now. So the opportunity is huge for us. We have to look at it differently. Our universities are great assets, and we have to implement and execute a planning exercise, and then think about roles and responsibilities and how we work together. And I think this export-related initiative that we're doing right now, really about, GPEC's role is about analytics. It's not about us becoming the trade service provider. But understanding the analytics and the data, and understanding how to use those in a conversation with industry, and understanding how that trade program gets built into our brand is something that's going to be very important to the Regional Economic Development Group. But that trade strategy may sit in our chambers, and it may sit in the Arizona Commerce Authority. But we'll work with, elevate, educate, motivate, provide support for, and utilize in our conversations with industry these new, well thought out products and services. So this is a series of new products and services, a human capital initiative, industry-led research, centering around our community, our higher education assets, with the goal to move from consumption to advanced industries. And the payoff in wages, quality of life, and tax income is profound. And it's really going to be an opportunity for us to take our place as a national and world leader. And I know we're very dedicated to doing that.
So Lee, you're the voice of the business community as an actual business person running a firm. What is your sense from this conversation? What do you think the role is for people like you in working with GPEC and other organizations in this region?
Yeah, from my view, I'm just interested in bringing it back to programs that will actually work. And one great thing that we've done here in the last couple of years, and it was under the leadership of Mayor Scott Smith, but we put a deal together. This is a public-private partnership that has been fantastic for us, where we use the City of Mesa's credit to build a $20 million building, no cash on our part going into it. We fully pay all this back over time through the lease. And this allowed us to deploy another $10 million into capital equipment and people so we could grow significantly faster. I want to see more innovative programs like that taking form that more can take advantage of. And something that the small and medium-sized business community is virtually never heard of when I ask them about it is the ICDIS structure for setting up an organization, the Interest Charged Domestic International Sales Corporation, where roughly 50% of the profits from international sales get taxed at the dividend rate. When you add it all up, that ends up being about 16% less than the ordinary income tax rate. And for guys like me and others running companies in the small to medium size range, we're taxed at the ordinary income rate. When you add it all up, it's in the 46% range right now in Arizona. Put in all the other taxes associated with it, it approaches 60%. So we really need to keep as much in our business as we possibly can if we're expected to grow. In this ICDIS structure, I think you absolutely got it right that way, or the government did, in terms of incentivizing international sales, because it's a huge advantage and a huge incentive for us to move in that direction.
So part of ultimately at the end, what you all produced in Portland, San Diego, and the other communities here is an export strategy, operational, who's responsible for what, where the resources are coming from, as well as a policy paper about what needs to change locally at the state level and hypothetically at the federal level in order to help execute more effectively from what you learned in the business interviews and the other elements of the market assessment and the issues and fragmentation that we're dealing with in helping businesses. So what you're describing will be at the end of this process in a couple of months will include some of those policy recommendations that build on what you're saying.
I think it's important. You got to put services on the ground, okay? And I think if services are in the federal government, they're not on the ground. And shifting, and I think they'll be more efficient, more productive, more affordable if they're on the ground. So if you take the Department of Commerce, They have a shop now called Select USA. Very small shop, 15, 20 people. All right? They kind of took it out of the Department of Commerce and they put it on the ground and they work with us on the ground. We get more value out of those 15 people and services for our economy than the entire Department of Commerce outside of it, because they're out of the federal bureaucracy, they're on the ground, and they're working with us. So, a big part of this metropolitan conversation is getting a ground troop program going where you execute, where you're close to the customer, where you can hear whether or not you've done a good job for businesses.
Right.
And I think nationalizing that conversation is a mistake. Making that a local conversation is the right one.
So we'll hear from the Secretary of Commerce and see what she has to say about that. Maybe what she's. I won't put the former Secretary of Commerce on the spot. But back to your prior comment and what you said about an innovation platform and some of these other things that relate to exports but are bigger than exports. Maybe just one more comment before we go to questions from the audience. But David and Derek, can you talk about how working on the export effort yielded some other areas of investment or activity that are more about supporting the overall competitiveness of the region? That's not purely about helping a business to export to its first market or to additional market that came out of your export strategies. So, Derek, you want to do this first?
Well, I think because, again, it's the emphasis, it's a business retention and expansion effort, has allowed us to take some of the discussions that were already going on regionally and have them to be more practically focused around specific steps related to exports. And then you've seen very positive spillover effects where there's discussions about what's going on in Portland that has helped us from other business development standpoint. And so because you have people outside your region looking at your region and saying, this is, I'd heard this is a neat place to live, but I hadn't really thought about all the neat, innovations that are going on in business. And so it kind of gives your economic development, public-private community a chance to relook at some things, and then it causes those outside the area to see some of the attributes that may have been hidden before. And I think that really helps play out also in this whole exchange meetings that will be happening over the next day or two.
Yeah, so San Diego is known for sunshine and for pandas and I love Shamu, right? That's been our brand, and every summer hosting many of you as your local beach. We missed a whole part of our innovation economy in our normal discussions in public. Qualcomm founded in San Diego, which CDMA technology and the chips that they're making now are in most of your cell phones here. Illumina, one of the most innovative companies, rated as such by MIT recently, that is mapping the genome. We have this set of companies and innovation and ideas that are being run with our trade organizations, but it's not in our general conversation as a city. To the point that when we sat down to create this plan, we recognized that we had everybody doing separate trade organizations, but no high impact coordination. One simple thing that came out of our plan was, let's have a calendar of where everybody's planning on going, and let's try to, both in our public conversation, in our multiple organizations, city resources, say, this is what we're doing and this is how San Diego is becoming a more global city. Just things as simple as that, we noticed that through the planning process, we actually found lessons that were learned that we immediately began implementing. And you'll find that, until you say that we're going to be intentional about this, everybody's just too busy to do that cross coordination. And so I think a number of the things that we found were far more simple than you would expect, but it's because we had the right people in the right room, making the right decisions, and all around the same goal.
So you're saving money, you're filling some gaps and eliminating redundancies in what
absolutely. And I think it's leading to a higher impact. So rather than just our bio and life sciences people, we also will have our tech folks going. We'll also have our tourism authority, all being able to provide a more complete picture of who and what San Diego is when we go to China and Japan and Germany and to these other locations. The other added benefit that we're hoping to have happen is, coming from the political side of the world, After one of these trips happens, there's inevitably an expose about how much that hamburger cost in London and how much the hotel rooms were. We're trying to use a communication strategy on a national level that reverberates back down to our local level and say, here is why this is good. Here are the functional things that we're getting out of these trips. Because inevitably, it'll just end up on the kind of the scandal and watchdog pages if we're not all trying to explain to the public with a unified voice that this is why San Diego, or this is why Phoenix, or this is why Portland has to be intentional about its global identity.
So, Derek, just back to you for 1 second. There was an example about going through your analysis of how much, and you just came to Phoenix, you rely on semiconductors and Intel that related to some infrastructure issues that came out of it with the bridge. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, it was less so the bridge than from Portland over to the border with Washington than getting chips from the west side suburbs to the airport, either for shipping out by air or that's where all the freight consolidation is by truck. And so one of the neat things about this strategy is it allowed us to, instead of slicing and dicing and say, does this company fit under this size program, we could say, no, let's look at the computer electronics industry. This is a critical industry for us. Intel may be a company based in California, but all its largest facilities and its most leading cutting edge work is done here in Oregon. And we have this whole industry that's built up around that and other firms. What can we do to help make that more effective and help these secondary exporters, these local companies that are in the supply chains, or these companies that come internationally into supply chains? And one problem was the transportation. And so the Port of Portland, through the Export Initiative, did a study looking at what's called the West Side Freight and Logistics Analysis, saying what are some of the short-term efforts we could attack to try to get these high-value goods from a semiconductor facility on the west side suburbs to their distribution center without having to look at something huge like building a new freeway or a tunnel or something like that, but short to medium term focused on improvements in that. And it's something that's really clicked well with the business community, and then it allows groups that do the advocacy to turn that into grant applications and to tweak the thoughts of the State Transportation Commission, how they're approaching it. And it's a very practically focused way of how you can assist a key industry that will then have reverberations on the whole supply chain.
Great. Thanks very much. So I'm going to open it up for questions, and also if any of the other regions who are here want to offer comments or reactions, then that's also welcome. So is there anyone who has a question for Barry about what's going to be happening next, or Lee, or yes? And please introduce yourself and who you're affiliated with.
Hi, my name is Eddie Tantoco, former Vice President of Marriott Corporation and recently Starwood Hotels. I have my own global consulting firm. I have a question for the gentleman in the avocado machete tie. I forgot your name. I know I met you somewhere. I can empathize with you with the frustration you have felt. I mean, with these two major corporations, in growing all over the world, the frustration of dealing with the obstacles that we have to overcome in our country just to grow is just really burdensome. But lately, we've been seeing a lot of support coming in from the government, especially with today's economic times. What I'd like to ask you, because right now I'm helping grow some companies here in Arizona that has unbelievable technology, and I'd like to ask you how much support you're getting today from the government, the various government agencies here in Arizona.
Well, I would say that we're just starting to take advantage of it, but some of the big things that have been done, for example, the facility that we have, that was gigantic in terms of giving us a lot of extra resources to invest in actually growing. But in terms of direct support to help us grow, I would say for the first time ever, it feels like the government's showing up saying we're here to help, and they really mean it, which is fantastic. But in terms of other programs, GoldKey is the only thing we've really taken advantage of, and just generally understanding and helping us with the regulations. Sure.
Other questions over there?
Thank you. I'm Jim Ratcliffe, CEO of Ropar Pharmaceuticals, and I noticed in the Phoenix Business Journal this week a Brookings report that showed that in the United States, small businesses were failing at a rate twice that of small business creation. My question for all you gentlemen is, what is the role of small business in your strategy for development in your metro center, and what are the moving parts you would imagine in your own metropolitan area as to small business creation, small business failure? Thank you.
Barry, why don't you take that first?
Well, this is a really important question because you have to align the institutional industry behaviors with the small business sector. So I think one of the problems we've had is we treat small businesses like they're this separate thing over here, and then we run over here and treat Intel and Apple like they're this other thing over here. But if you look at the small and medium enterprises here in the Valley, or if you look at Intel and Apple, they'll all tell you you have to do a better job at delivering human capital to us. You know, small and medium enterprises in the Brookings plan needs access to engineering services at ASU and University of Arizona, just like Intel and Apple does. They need a much greater proficient STEM delivery system into the market for their needs. And they need export-related services as well. So what we're trying to do in our plan is create, a common set of needs and capabilities and services. So whether you're 3 people or 3,000 people or 30,000 people, you're benefiting from one single set of plans and objectives. I think one of the things you have to stay away from is, not trying to do something you shouldn't be doing. I think one of the big challenges for the Valley and a lot of communities when they're trying to take their small and medium enterprise sector to scale, and that's usually in the technology sector, is they try to come up with the capital and the direct financial investment sources for it. I've never seen an economic development plan or strategy. I've never seen a government plan or strategy that was very successful in delivering capital resources to small and medium enterprises to help them go to scale. But I've seen exceptional work done in things like delivering engineering talent and workforce and providing the right tax environment. And one of the things that our government's done for business here in Arizona is we've moved from 28th into the top 10 in business taxes, regulations, and costs of doing business in just the last 3 years. And we did that while managing a structural deficit, which will help all businesses. So I think it's about integrating all these products and services equally for small businesses and big businesses and getting efficient and proficient at delivering those capabilities.
Lee, as a person who took it from a small business to a medium-sized business, what's your reaction to that question? In terms of what's more support for small businesses? What would, from your experience, what would have benefited you beyond the export question in other areas of your growth?
Yeah, again, it's some of the stuff that we've talked about already, but having that 12-step program to actually exporting, really getting the help. There's a lot of programs that look good, sound good, or feel good. We're, again, really interested in what actually works. So we want the number of programs that actually work and understanding what that looks like to be able to export. So we need help on the as you were saying, Barry, on getting the right people in the organization. And it's not just the skill set, but the perspective on, hey, when I come to work for you, we actually expect to earn what we get. So there's a perspective training there as well. But really, across the board, we could use help just about everywhere, could have used help just about everywhere.
So San Diego has a disproportionately high amount of job creation through startups that's sustained over time. It is almost equivalent to the amount of job creation over the past decade that was from expansion of existing businesses, which is very unusual. So how does small business fit into what you're doing broadly on economic development, but also specifically around global cities and exports?
So SMEs are really important in our plan, and this is where we're leveraging existing programs and then trying to replicate that model across other industries. Connect, which works in the tech space, has a great springboard model where basically you go through several panels and it's connecting businesses to a mentorship program where you're having C-level executives reviewing your financial plan, your marketing plan, and then a final panel to determine whether or not what your business is viable. So 64% of those businesses are still around today, and it's drawn $1.4 billion in capital. We want to take that model, and this was one of the fascinating things about our plan. We realized there was no international component of that very successful model. So we're looking not only to replicate that across other industries, but we're also looking to add an international export module to that sort of work, because there are going to be some companies that should be born global. They shouldn't be looking to scale locally and then state and then nationally. They really should be looking to start from the very beginning as a global company. And so we're trying to institute some of that in everything that we do. And I think the other big thing, and from the Global Cities perspective, is FDI. And I think that is where we're at now of what we're working on is how do we bring in that foreign capital? How do we support good acquisitions of companies that get to a certain size and then get bought by another larger international firm and keep that capital churning in San Diego? Those are the next challenges that we're really wrestling with.
Derek, how does Portland handle this in your export strategy and beyond?
Well, I think one of the exciting things about the export strategy is it gives you, you can modulate what you do. And so a small, medium-sized enterprise is going to need help connecting with the U.S. Department of Commerce GoldKey because they haven't heard of it. They haven't utilized it before. Or an equivalent state, if you have a state office that has an overseas service similar. But an Intel or someone like that, they're not going to need that service, but they may need help on the supply chain development or the workforce development or some other area. And so the nice thing about this is it allows us to get out of the, if you don't qualify for, if you're larger than this, you can't qualify for this program, because we're able to do a look at it separately and just say, okay, small, medium-sized enterprises, they are going to get more help from chambers, from local economic development officials. So how can we train them so they know where some of the export services are out there? So that the cities can connect companies in their areas through those business and retention expansion visits with services that work that they may not be aware of. At the same time, the community can embrace a critical employer like a Boeing or an Intel or someone and address other things in the supply chain or in workforce or in other aspects that are not going to be as impacted by a smaller company. So I think that's the nice thing of it, because again you have this public-private partnership. You're allowed to kind of think outside the box and attack some things, and with the FDI it'll be similar because we'll be able to look at some things that aren't traditional ways of doing economic development. I think that's one of the most exciting things, because it really, what you can think of and what is practical is what you can do. And if something is working in your system here in Phoenix, like as we found parts in Portland that were working well, that's not included in our plan because it's working well and we don't need to go reinvent that. So it really allowed us to target our resources, both in financial but also in people's volunteer time, which gets used up pretty quickly, on things where we really could make a difference. And if it was working well, we would continue to do that. And if we saw something that needed to be improved, that's where we would attack on.
Yes, we've got about 10-ish minutes before the Secretary's feed. I'm going to take additional questions, and I have some more that I can ask myself. But yes.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment. This is probably going to sound a little bit like self-promotion in a commercial, but one of the things that JPMorgan Chase, I mentioned, we survey our clients, and we don't do that just to get data. But everything that we do is about what do our clients need, what sort of things, resources, capital they need to grow their business, expand. So small, medium-sized businesses clearly are getting more global. And to do that, they need access to capital, banking products. So, we have really built our international platform and invested more in it for small and medium-sized businesses. It started as more of the Fortune 500s, but today it needs to be a platform for small and medium-sized businesses. So what does that mean? So companies more and more, instead of just accessing letters of credit or simple accounts, they need complicated structures to allow them to do business in China, do business in India. And a lot of that is more than just capital, it's understanding. So we have people on the ground across the globe that can sit down with our clients and explain to them what are the regulatory issues of doing business in China or India or Brazil. And just to be clear, it's getting more and more difficult to navigate the international sort of business. We talked a lot about regulatory things, and there's a number of things that, going back to this private-public partnership, we at Chase, we're working with our public partners around how can we help our clients and businesses do business internationally and do it easier and more efficient. So again, it might sound a little self-promotion, but as we talked about small and medium-sized businesses, I think we're trying to play a part in that and try to make sure that we can move that ball forward. So
another question over there. Yes, one more over there.
Yeah, my name's Andy Germer. I've been involved in participating in global trade for 30 plus years, both on the Fortune 50 side and now as a member of the Arizona District Export Council. And we're really pushing companies to get involved. But one of the biggest issues we have when we have a forum like this is the distribution list is probably to people who are already drinking the bathwater by and large. So the participants here have signed up and said, yeah, we like the Global Cities Initiative. We believe in globalization. It's mandatory. I would guess that probably 95% of the small and medium-sized businesses in Arizona don't know about the resources that are being planned, are not aware of the GoldKey, as Lee has mentioned. A lot of services that are out there, they're very scared of getting involved in international business. So somehow we've got to figure out a way to tell these small and educate, inform these small and medium-sized industries that the main reason you get involved globally is to make money and to grow your company and to increase the value of your company. So just some thoughts from the panel and how we engage and how we bring probably 50 or 100 companies that should have been participating today and listening to you guys speak about the benefits of global trade and the necessity of global trade and globalization. So it's an ongoing issue we face at the District Export Councils. How do we expand the inclusion of these small and mid-sized companies? So comments or ideas from you guys would be
and that's a very common, working with 20 places around the country, it's a very common question about moving from the reactive who wants to export to the proactive, identifying particular industry sectors and how do you reach them. So I'm opening it up to anyone who's been working on that on the panel.
I actually love the idea of an export assessment team actually coming in, and so how do we make everybody aware of that? One example could be I belong to a group called Vistage. We have about 16,000 members worldwide, and the majority of the hundreds of CEOs involved in Vistage, this CEO peer advisory group in the Phoenix area, again, the buzz around exporting is almost zero. So why not proactive plans to get to these groups of business leaders out there to say, hey, this is a big deal. Are you aware of IC-DIS? Taxes are lower if you do international business. We have an assessment team. We're going to help you. So I think there's a lot that we could do that in all my years of being here, which has been quite a while, it's been virtually zero.
We've tried to address that challenge in a couple different ways. One is, the beauty of the Global Cities Initiative is it gets everyone talking about this. Now, granted, not everybody's in this room, but you will get press coverage out of this and Twitter feeds and other things that will spark some conversations there, and you'll get questions afterwards that will force you to grapple with some things, and you will get clients coming out of the woodwork. It's just like every time we have a new, like there's a JPMorgan Chase expert from China that came to our market recently. And you get companies who had an inkling but weren't really sure, and they come out because they see this, and suddenly they get interested. That leads them to a question about a GoldKey or something like that. So we've seen that, that can definitely happen. On a more strategic way, I think it's, like the following up on the work that the council has done here, with partners on those business retention and expansion type of calls, where you have those one-on-one discussions with companies. That's why we've trained a lot of economic development professionals. So when they go in to have that conversation, it's not just about zoning or workforce, all these other critical issues, but it also includes, they have now a general knowledge of some of these export issues, so they can talk about them. Well, if they're looking to increase sales, because fundamentally that's what it's about, they'll see it not from sort of an international trade point of view. They're looking at sales increase, and which we're then looking at as job increases from the economic development community. And so I think you get folks who are out there communicating directly to companies. If they have a general knowledge and understanding, they can help and answer some of those immediate questions an SME has and help direct them to services. It's also just, and this is, I think, is a big thing that Brookings would emphasize, and as part of this effort, is this is a culture shift. I mean, this is a different way of approaching things and looking at it, and looking at the opportunities instead of the threats. The threats are there, but looking more at the opportunities and what we can do. And so this is a long-term play, in our opinion. That's why we're really excited about moving this into foreign direct investment, because we see those interrelated, and it's all part of the globalization in the best sense of that term. How do you connect your city with your universities, your tourism, your students, all of that? This is a long-term effort, and so while we have short-term goals, we see this as fundamentally turning the ship in a different direction.
Well, and just teeing off of that, because I agree with everything that Derek said, especially the culture shift and the communications shift in your region. An idea that we've been working off of since we found that one of our problems was market diversity. Top 10 markets that we do business in represent 60% of our exports. So we're very heavy in those, and we want to take two things. One, expand our market diversity by finding those other markets where we produce products that naturally go to those markets. And two, use that weakness as a strength. By that, we say find the companies that are doing work in particular products in particular markets, and have them have a mentorship type program or connect them with other businesses that are non-exporters so that they can share that information and reduce the barrier to entry. Because one of our biggest issues was people the reason why they don't trade is they didn't know how to, and they didn't feel like investing in doing that was important to them. And so partnering up these companies, using our trade organizations, identifying specific markets, you just got to take bites at the apple to get at the final solution.
Anything else from the audience? Okay, I just have one quick question about building on what Phoenix is doing, connecting to Mexico City, and what you all are doing in targeting particular metro trade relationships based upon common industry interests and sectors. And then I want to give Barry an opportunity to talk about what's happening next after this market assessment gets completed, and what the time frame is and what he needs from all of you. So first, Derek, can you talk a little bit about what you're trying to cultivate with Brazil?
Right. So there's something called Trade City Partnerships that one of our key regional partners, the Portland Development Commission, has kicked off, and it's a similar idea to the Global Cities connection between Chicago and Mexico City. We've done it just on a slightly different scale since we're a different size scale city than Chicago. So we have one with Jaraguá do Sul in Brazil and with Changsha in China. And essentially it's like a sister city, but it's not, because it's an approach on trade and business as opposed to all the other positive things that are in sister cities, but they tend to de-emphasize the economic ties. And so those have involved, high-level MOUs, but also then specific delegations going there and coming here, that again will be sort of a long-term follow-up, but it gives us an opportunity to broaden that metro-to-metro connection and have it be really about practical business issues. And especially in a new market for us like Brazil, it's an exciting way to build off some of the things like the Global Cities Initiative meeting that was held in Brazil a year or two ago, to build on some of those and have them to see us as a partner for doing business.
And what practically is going on between in terms
right.
of
So in the case of Brazil, there was a bunch of athletic and outdoor related designers that came and on a mission to the Portland area, because in addition to Nike, we also have the North American headquarters of Adidas. We have a whole host of other athletic and outdoor companies, Columbia and others. And so they came to tap into some of that knowledge and see what some of the opportunities would be there for partnerships. We also, the city of Portland made a deal with a sustainable business consulting firm in Brazil that has helped look for market opportunities for Portland regional firms that are trying to break into the Brazil market. And one was included, sort of an offshoot of that was helping a company that does software for streaming live video to try to break into the Brazilian Olympics market, building off their success in London and others. And so it's nascent, but I think is exciting, and we've had some early positive signs.
Great. David, briefly about your relationship with Mexico.
So the Cali-Baja mega region is our major effort on cross-border. That's 6 economic development organizations on both sides of the border having an agreement together to basically promote both sides of the border when we're on trade missions, when we're attracting companies. We see companies wanting to headquarter in San Diego, but nearshore some of their manufacturing to the maquiladoras. We see this partnership of being able to work where rather than having manufacturing occurring all the way in China, it's a 30-minute drive down there. You can see it. It's closer. There's really an advantage to both. And again, back to that cooperation rather than competition, we see that as really being able to leverage, if you can't do the manufacturing for one reason or another in San Diego, well then look at Tijuana. And if there are attributes there that are good, it's good for the entire region.
Great. So Barry, what happens next, and what do you need from everyone here?
Well, I think first off, we have to do continued assessment. So we assess the industry, we assess the market, and we get a better handle on where the opportunities are and what is the status of the industries in the market. That translates to a lot of other behaviors in our market. Secondly, we need to inventory and assess what are the current trade programs going on in the market. Because I think one of the things we're finding out early on, we're finding out on the talent assessment, the huge disconnect between the people that are producing versus the people that need the services. And how do you link those relationships together better? And then I think ultimately, we have to have a go-to-market strategy. And that go-to-market strategy needs to be very simple, very incremental, just like building a company. It's going to have to be very lean, and it's going to have to be very clean to get started. And I think that's going to have to be surrounded by analytics and discipline. You were talking about the international trips where people want to know how much you pay for a hamburger in London. The first thing I was thinking is when you're in London, don't eat a hamburger, for God's sakes. That's why God invented curry. But the second thing that I was thinking is, we don't go unless we've got something pretty close to being in the palm of our hands for the form of a result. So I think these international trips draw scrutiny sometimes because they're not disciplined and they're not tied back to a set of results and objectives. But we've had very good success on the foreign direct investment side by being very disciplined, and I think we're going to have to do the same thing on the trade side. It's going to be a new experience for the community, a new experience for the culture. It's going to be a new experience for the capabilities. So it's going to be difficult to do. I think we have to be in it in the long run, as they are in Portland. I think we're going to learn a lot, but I think it's going to be an exciting part of our business. There are 180,000 high-wage jobs in Greater Phoenix that are tied to trade. So it's a big business, and we need to treat it that way.
And what's your time frame?
September.
There we go. All right. First, thank you to the panel. Really appreciate this. Please thank them. And we will now all move off of the stage. And I'll turn this back over to Amy Liu.